Maybe a good segue. Speaking of courts, either doing or not doing a good job. Let's move into one of the ones where we've been following it for a while. The Rachel Maddow defense has now been officially affirmed by, I don't know what circuit it was, but it's out west. Is it the Ninth Circuit?
Yeah, because the case was filed in California. Oh, and the live chat is now up at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. But it was this was the One America News Network, where basically Rachel Maddow's defense was nobody could ever take me seriously as a journalist or think anything I say is factual.
So I wanted to bring this on. It says, Yo, Viva, my extended family live in Michigan, opposite us in Ontario. They all say Whitmer ought to be impeached. Charlie LaDuff is a pro. By the way, Charlie LaDuff is awesome. If you want sort of like a Howard Stern delivery meets Robert De Niro, but good journalism, the No Bullshit Hour, Charlie LaDuff, amazing. Viva Barnes is the most important podcast on earth right now. Booyah, I tend to agree. Oh, yes, the Rachel Maddow defense. Nobody could have ever taken her words to be statements of fact. They would have known that when she said OAN and what's the name? Christian Ruse is really literally Russian paid propaganda. It was hyperbolic, not to be a statement of fact. Now, everybody knows the backdrop to this story. OAN sued for defamation. They got their suit booted on anti-SLAPP motions. It went to the Ninth Circuit Appeals, who affirmed it. I don't think I got it wrong. I think there were 2 George Bush judges and 1 Obama, 1 old George Bush, 1 younger George Bush, 1 Obama. I don't know that I disagree with the decision on the substance, or I can understand how they got to it, because my argument from the beginning was Christian Ruse was, in fact, at one point paid by Sputnik before OAN. So, someone can say, okay, he was paid by Sputnik, which is a Russian-controlled media entity. So it's exaggerating to say that he's literally Russian paid propaganda, but there's a sufficient basis, in fact, to justify it. They didn't even go with that argument. They just said, when she said literally really Russian propaganda, it was hyperbolic exaggeration that her audience was expecting from what was otherwise accurate reporting on the Daily Beast article. It was a 3-0 decision. I mean, how do you feel about the decision? Because this sort of cuts both ways when it comes to other defamation lawsuits where we think people should be allowed to report and exaggerate freely to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, what it shows is the complete contradiction by the courts. And this has been the case in defamation context for a long time, that when it's a liberal media defendant being sued, it's almost always hyperbole or exaggeration and never a statement that any reasonable person, because the legal standard is, could any reasonable person think that's a factual statement? Not whether or not these judges think it's a factual statement, not whether her audience thought it was a factual statement, but whether any reasonable juror could think it's a factual statement, or any reasonable member of the community. And by that standard, I thought she crossed the line when she said One America News Network was literally Russian propaganda, that there'd be at least some people who would interpret that to mean One America News Network is Russian paid propaganda, not whether one person was ever paid by the Russian government at any Russian media station before. And so, but as you know, they just said this could never be libel because anything she says is always just opinion, exaggerated hyperbole, and is not factual, which I think is, I don't think that fits the legal standard. I can see where someone comes to that conclusion, but I don't think every juror and every member of the public would agree. So that's one issue. It also definitely contradicts what they've said in the Alex Jones cases. If anybody is known for hyperbole, it's Alex Jones, and yet none of his statements are considered hyperbole. They're all absolute factual statements that he's subject to liability, even when he made no factual statement in some cases at all, or even referred to the person ever.
Well, Alex Jones, here's the thing. When looking at Alex Jones, I think people are looking at Alex Jones more for hyperbolic, opinionated statements, and not necessarily which are built on issues of fact, but also just exploring possibilities. And everyone says it's conspiracy theory means you're not stating fact, rather you're stating theory. That's the exact diametrically opposed matters of fact. Is a theory is not a statement of fact. It's specifically hypothesizing. With Rachel Maddow, first of all, I just double checked, by the way, Sputnik is Russian-owned.
By the Russian government.
It's Russian-owned news agency. And I say that without judgment. CNN. I say that without judgment. But just to fact check that. and someone had said, isn't this not identical to what Tucker Carlson did with talking about the hush money paid, where he accused one of the hush money ladies of quite literally extortion. Now, there's a legal distinction which some people might not agree with, is that when Tucker Carlson said this is literally or this is extortion, that I think most people are going to accept as being his opinion, because they were never convicted of extortion. He was just saying, in my opinion, this is extortion, without saying the in my opinion part. But I still say it's dangerous to make accusations of criminal conduct, because it will lead to defamation lawsuits. But when Tucker Carlson said this is extortion, I think most people understand that that's an opinion of law, because there was no finding of law of extortion. When Rachel Maddow said they are really literally Russian paid propaganda, that is going to, in the mind of most reasonable people, lead them to conclude that OAN is somehow paid by Russia in whatever way. I think the weaselly way to get out of it would have been to say, yeah, well, Christian Ruse was, and therefore it's sort of true enough that you have a former Russian paid journalist at your outlet. So they've been infiltrated. It's Russian paid propaganda. But no, they didn't even go there. They just said when she said it, it was hyperbolic. Everyone understood it to be hyperbolic and therefore dismissed. Meanwhile, you get Alex Jones, who maybe did accuse people of being crisis actors, suggesting that something that happened did not happen. And then they say those are statements of facts susceptible of defamation, and he's going straight to trial. So yes.
Yeah. I mean, the people are suing him. He's never talked about ever. He's never mentioned by name ever. So the disparity of standards is extraordinary. The contradiction, but it's one, if you dig into the court's history, all the courts have a long history of it. Institutional press gets protected. Sometimes ideologically aligned press gets protected, and other people don't. And it's a problem of not strictly applying the standard. The standard is, could a reasonable person have interpreted that as being a factual statement? And they may have been able to have an argument that you're mentioning that it was sufficiently true, or they disclosed sufficient underlying facts that it wasn't defamation, but that's not where they went. They said that nobody could possibly interpret. Say, if I say I'm a news person on a mainstream media network, and I say this is literally true, it turns out nobody could reasonably interpret that as being factual. I mean, it's an indictment of Rachel Maddow that she's just she's a crackpot opinion maker, that no one can take as being saying anything truthful factually, to such a degree that when she says, by the way, this is literally true, that definitely means it's not at all true.
Yeah, when the inter-attorney correspondence where they said literally can either be literal or hyperbolic, and when she said it was hyperbolic. I mean, when a word can simultaneously mean one thing and the exact opposite, to be left up to your sole interpretation, words cease to have meanings. But what drives me crazy in all of this is I do think a reasonable jury member could have come to the conclusion, whether or not they should have or whatever, a reasonable jury member could have, where the judges come in and on what they call a matter of law, say as a matter of law, no reasonable jury member could come to this conclusion. It was the same thing with Sandman. Have they not just usurped the very role of the jury?
Oh, that's exactly what they did. And the other issue that was present here is that in most federal courts, somebody might have told One American News Network this in advance about where to sue, but that ship has sailed.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
In most federal courts, the anti-SLAPP statute's not applicable, and so then they don't have to pay Rachel Maddow's fees even if they lose. That's I think maybe the Ninth Circuit may be the only one where that's true currently. So that presents an issue for the Supreme Court to get involved where they might otherwise not. They need to resolve a conflict between the circuits about, does the anti-SLAPP statute under state law apply in federal court? Most federal courts have said no, including an opinion Kavanaugh wrote when he was on the D.C. Circuit. So because of that unique procedural angle, they might have a unique means to get it up to the Supreme Court that could then also rule on what the scope of liability is concerning libel, that the Supreme Court's looking at some other cases potentially about. Obviously, both Thomas and Gorsuch have said we need to clarify our libel standards and probably have it be more strict than expansive. Now, I'm not in favor of that position that Gorsuch and Thomas have, but this case will also present an opportunity for that. But that procedural aspect may be the ticket whereby the One American News Network has an above-average chance to get the Supreme Court to hear this case.
And what about the dismissal with prejudice? Because the court yet again finds a way to justify the discretionary, but I imagine it's less often that they dismiss with prejudice as opposed to allow the party to amend to include additional facts that might be relevant. The court dismissed it with prejudice, but responded and said, even if we allowed the amendment, it would have been useless anyhow. But they nonetheless dismissed it with prejudice, meaning they cannot amend to add allegations to rectify or remedy whatever deficiencies were in the proceedings. Is that not susceptible of appeal? And how does that happen? Because in Quebec, unless it's changed, and I don't think it has, you could pretty much amend at any time, pretty much without limitation, unless the amendment is contrary to the ends of justice or, not timely made. But even those exceptions are exceptional. Here, to dismiss on a motion to dismiss under anti-SLAPP without giving leave to amend or the permission to amend seems like a denial of their day in court.
Yeah, the only time you can do that in the States is when you say there's no set of facts you could possibly allege that could possibly give you a claim. Now, it kind of shows where their bias was, that they said there's no scenario in which there's any. I mean, beyond concluding, if Rachel Maddow said it, it can't be factual and everybody knows it. Beyond that conclusion, which is the inference by these decisions. Now, they wouldn't want to say that because they're probably all at some level Maddow fans. A lot of your Bush judges are not great judges, especially the Ninth Circuit. But I mean, that's the only way you could say no amendment could work is to conclude that nothing Rachel Maddow ever says could be taken by any reasonable person as even possibly being factually true.
Yeah, well, I think the problem is she didn't say they're literally Russian. It's literally the best car on earth, or it's literally the stinkiest cheese on earth. I don't know why those two examples just came to mind. She said really literally. It was to emphasize a fact in my mind. But so whatever.
Yeah, clearly.
She'll be
but it's Rachel Maddow. The federal courts have ruled Rachel Maddow, anything she says can't be factual as a matter of law.